Hey fellow sewers! In this video, I'll be making my own dress form using my own measurements and a pattern I ordered from Bootstrap Fashions. Here's a list of the materials I used, which can also be found on their website. They emailed me PDF patterns, which I printed and cut out. For the cover of the dress form, I'm using this 100% cotton fabric, which I have washed and machine dried. And this is the woven fusible interfacing, which I have dipped in hot water and line dried. And for the internal stabilizer, I'm using a raw denim, which I also washed and machine dried. And now I'm going to place the interfacing on top of the cotton fabric with the rough side of the interfacing down, and I'm going to fuse them together by pressing with a steam iron. The interfaced fabric is folded lengthwise and the patterns are laid out like so, but I should have folded it inside out so I can make the marks on the wrong side, but I ended up using an erasable pen on top and repeating the marks on the interfacing side, which was more work than I needed to do, so you don't have to go through that if you just mark it on the wrong side. So I have all my patterns cut out, making sure that all my notches and marks are transferred. I'll do the same with the stabilizer pattern, but this does not need to be interfaced. I've cut out my armhole patterns out of cardboard and marked my notches. I've done the same for the base of the dress form. I used a box cutter and scissors. It's now time to cut the sponge for the neck of the dress form. I drew the circle on both sides to keep it straight. I tried 2 different types of knives, which did not work, so I ended up using scissors, which worked much better. It's okay if the sides are not perfectly smooth, as long as the size is correct. And there it is. Now I have assembled my pattern pieces for the front and also the back. So I'm going to first sew the side pieces together, which will be the princess seams of the back. So I'm going to pin those together, matching all my notches and lines. These are all the lines that I have marked on the wrong side of the fabric. So I'm going to go ahead and pin these together, matching the lines. I'm matching my notches right here. It may not lie perfectly flat when you're pinning it because it's a curved area, but as long as you're matching the lines, it will be fine after you sew it. So here I have both sides pinned and ready to be sewn, and this is going to be the center back later. Okay, so I am done sewing. I'm going to go ahead and clip the seam allowance to help it lay flat in the curved areas. Now it's time to work on the front pieces. I'm going to start with the top half. So here are my bust cup pieces. I am making sure to read the marks and labels so I don't switch them around. I am pinning them together, matching my notches. And they're gonna go like this when they're sewn together. I am making sure that I have a side and center piece. They look so similar, so this could be very confusing if it's not marked. So I've got these pinned together. And now it is time to go ahead and sew. Okay, I'm pinned and ready, and I'm gonna go ahead and sew these pieces together. And now it's time to work on the front lower half of the dress form by sewing these 2 pieces together. And that is done. Now we can attach the cups to the lower bodice, matching the seams and the curves. You can pre-baste or pin before sewing, and you may have to clip into the seam allowance of the bottom curve to ease that into the convex part. Okay, we have that already sewn up. I'm going to go ahead and remove my basting thread. And this is what it looks like on the right side, and the seams are perfectly lined up like we want them to. These lines on the right side of the fabric are erasable, but the ones on the back are the proper markings I'm using. Both sides are sewn. So I'm gonna go ahead and clip the seam allowance of the cups as well so they can lie flat. Once I clip these, it will be easier to press open the seam allowance. Or I can use my fingernails like so. We are done with the lower half, checking one more time that the center and side pieces are correctly placed, which seems to be the case. The centers are in the right place and the arrows are pointing in the right direction. So this seems to be placed correctly. So now it is time to start working on the top half of the front. We're gonna sew the side pieces first, and we're gonna attach the whole thing to the bottom half that we sewed earlier. The first thing we wanna do is match up the princess seams and pin them together. Then continue pinning out towards the side seam and the center front. And repeat the same thing on the other side. I'm gonna sew this up. After that, I have pinned the center front and the center back together just to try it on. The bust was too large and it was too low on the bodice, so I took it in like so. I also took in the hip a little. The rest of the markings seem to be on point. I heard that you're not supposed to try it on and do this, but it worked out just fine. Once I made the adjustments, it looked a little banged up, but I tried it on again and it seemed to fit much better. Now we can go ahead and attach the center front. And I'm pinning everything together, lining up the notches and the lines just like before. The center front is sewn together. Now it's time to attach the neck piece. And I am keeping the center back open still. There are two ways to attach this. One is while the center back is open, another is closing the center back and just attaching a full circle to the neck, which is much more difficult, I think. This is much easier. I have clipped and pressed the seam allowance open, and now it's time to close the back. I am matching up my lines again like I did before. These have to be perfectly lined up because if you decide to do the top stitching like they showed on their website, then these are the lines you're going to be using for the bust and the hip and the waist, etc. I did not do the top stitching on my dress form because I wanted the option to be able to change the placement later and I could use tape. Okay, now that the back is closed, I'm gonna try the sponge to make sure it fits in the neck, and it seems like it does. You wanna make sure that it fits snugly so it stays in place. And this is the cover that will go in place, and you can pre-baste this to make it easier to sew it in place. I'm gonna go ahead and match my notch with the center back seam and match the side seams and the center front seam. So it looks like it fits nicely. You can pin this or baste this and go ahead and sew it. I just put the sponge just so I can make sure that the whole thing fits together, but it is not time to put the sponge in right now, so I'm gonna take it out. One thing I didn't like was that the neck looked like a straight cylinder all around. So I modified it a bit to give the neck a more forward flex like the neck of a real dress form. If you do this, you'll have to correct the size of the cover or ease it in. So just a heads up, because I took in about 1/2 inch at the top and blended it to the bottom of the neck. I liked how the neck was more tapered at the top and looked more realistic. I decided not to change the size of the cover. Instead, I just eased it in, which worked just fine. Now we're gonna sew the armhole. I'm gonna start by pinning the base cover, matching the notches. The double notch goes on the back and the single notch goes on the front. First, I'm gonna place the base cover, making sure the placements are correct, and the cardboard will be sandwiched between the two pieces of identical fabric. The cardboard will go over the base and the top cover will go over it like so. But first, I am going to sew on the bottom layer. I have pinned it in place by making some clips in the seam allowance to ease it into the curve. Now the base covers are sewn in. It is time to put the cardboards in place, matching the front and back notches. And after that, the top cover will go on like this. I'm gonna pin the two pieces together with the cardboard inside, and I'm gonna do the same thing on both sides. I am matching the notches on the cardboard as well as the fabric. I am using a zipper foot to get as close as possible to the sew line. I'm also using heavy duty thread for the whole project, as well as a large needle size 100/16. Now it's time to do the base cover. Stitch along this line to join the two layers. After sewing the two layers together, clip the curved part. Okay, I have clipped my curve right here. That makes it much easier to flip over. But first, I'm gonna press the seam allowance open. I'm trimming the excess seam allowance in the curved part. And I am flipping over, pushing out the corners. And now I'm gonna go ahead and press this flat. And I'm gonna do the same thing with the other one. Both pieces are pressed. I'm gonna go ahead and attach my zippers. I'm using two standard zippers, 7 inches long. I folded and stitched the ends, as you can see. I'm gonna simply place the two pieces on top and top stitch them. I'm gonna go ahead and pin this in place. I'm gonna go ahead and top stitch this from here to there, and I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Both sides are sewn in and the zipper opens and closes so nothing is snagged. The zippers are longer than I need, so before I cut them to size, I want to reinforce the ends. This will be the stop once I cut the end. I'm gonna go ahead and do the same thing on the other side first. Okay, and that is good. I'm gonna go ahead and cut my thread. And I'm gonna go ahead and snip these ends. And that is secure, and that's secure. It's time to sew the pipe sleeve. You are going to go ahead and decide what your seam allowance will be based on the size of your pipe. So I am trying mine out, and it looks like about 1/2 inch of seam allowance should be okay. And I have sewn that seam allowance, so it's time to try the pipe to make sure that it can go in and easily slide out if necessary. Now it's time to put the stabilizer together. I have matched the notches, and the back is going to be sewn like this, and the front is going to be sewn to the pipe sleeve like this. I'm gonna pin the back piece like this and sew it right there, and I'm going to attach and pin the front piece and I'm going to go ahead and sew it the same way, like so. And when it's done, it's gonna look like this. I've top stitched vertical lines all over to reinforce the 2 layers, and this excess will be glued to the cardboard base later. Now it's time to attach the stabilizer to the bodice. I'm going to first lay the bodice flat on its side, like so. I'm going to go ahead and clip the rest of my seam allowances first. Now I have my stabilizer here. I'm going to line up the center front of the bodice with the front piece and the center back of the bodice with the back piece. I'm pinning it together, carefully matching all the notches, which is very important. Once it's all pinned together, I went ahead and sewed it. This is what it looks like on the stabilizer side. And now it is time to turn it inside out and check to make sure that it looks right. So I have checked it and it looks like it is floating in the middle of the bodice like it's supposed to. Flip inside out again. Now I'm going to attach the base cover of the dress form. I'm pinning the center front, center back, and the side seams. I have pinned everything together and I have sewed it. Now it's time to turn it right side out. Okay, now that we're done sewing the dress form, it's time to do the stuffing. I ended up using a couple of bags of this fiber fill. The instruction says to use small amounts at a time and do it slowly, and also to keep measuring the circumference as you go. After filling it out completely and checking the measurements, it's time to insert the cardboard. Before zipping up, pull the extra fabric from the pole and make vertical slits in it to make a fringe. You can use scissors to do this, like this. And once you make the cuts, you can glue each of those fringes to the cardboard. Sorry about the poor visibility. The dress form kind of started moving and slipped out of the camera view. Once you're done, you can zip it up. I got my stand online and my PVC pipe fit perfectly on it. And I also got this contraption from Lowe's, which helps stabilize the dress form. And there it is. My dress form is finally done. I hope this video helps you if you decide to make your own custom dress form. Thank you for watching, and until next time, happy sewing!